Hi, welcome back to my channel. In this edition of True Crimes based on the plot of American Horror Story, we're going to be talking about H.H. Holmes. This video is going to be long. I can't imagine it won't be multiple parts. This story has a lot of detail to it. I would grab a coffee, snack, what have you. H.H. Holmes was the first known serial killer in America. He was dubbed the Beast of Chicago. The number of people that he killed, it's hard to tell. They know it's at least 30, and the estimates could be that it's up to 200. He confessed to 27 killings. They could confirm 9 of those. Of those 27 that he admitted to killing, a few of those people were actually found alive. But of the confirmed killings, they were mostly unmarried women or prostitutes. H.H. Holmes was born on May 16, 1861 as Herman Webster Mudgett. And he was from New Hampshire, and throughout his entire life, he would be known as a con artist. He was confirmed to be a repeated bigot, which means that he would be married to more than one woman at one time, and he was involved in over 50 lawsuits just in Chicago alone. There's mixed reports with regard to his home life in terms of growing up. Some people say that his parents were very religious, and they have described his mother as sort of cold and not very approachable. There's also reports that his father was a very violent alcoholic. It was reported that he killed animals as a child and that he was bullied frequently, though there's not really direct proof of that, mostly to do with the time period, but those are what some of the stories are. If you saw my video, the first video part of Richard Ramirez, I went over the characteristics of a serial killer. So if you want to sort of check back with that video, it's right in the beginning part. Obviously, some of these things that are reported to have happened in Holmes's growing up and his history do lend themselves to the characteristics of a serial killer. An interesting fact about Holmes was he was unusually afraid of doctors as a child, and some local bullies knew this and thought it would be funny to lock him in a room with a real doctor's skeleton, a real skeleton, and instead of frightening him, it actually fascinated him, and it started his sort of lifelong interest of the body and of that sort of thing. His first marriage was in 1878 at age 18 to Clara Lovering. He explained that the reason he chose to marry her was because she was very affluent and wealthy. This idea of attaching himself to wealthy women is a theme that you're going to see throughout his story. While they were married, he reportedly treated her badly, and therefore she returned back to New Hampshire. She was away at school with him in Michigan, and he was treated her so badly that she went back to New Hampshire in 1882. In the late part of 1886, while he was still married to Clara, he also married Marta, and he filed for divorce from Clara a few weeks later, citing infidelity as the reason for divorce. But even so, it was never finalized, and he had already married someone else before he filed. Holmes had a daughter with Marta, and her name was Lucy Theodate Holmes, and she was born on July 4th of 1889. So as far as Holmes's education, he did attend medical school at the University of Michigan's Department of Medicine and Surgery in 1882, and he graduated in June of 1884. While he was in school, though, he robbed the medical department for bodies, and then he sold the skeletons for cash, as well as he robbed graves and used them for insurance fraud. Again, this behavior of robbing sort of graves or selling skeletons that were not obtained properly and insurance fraud, that's going to continue throughout his life. Prior to moving to Chicago, he changed his name to H.H. Holmes, and the purpose of that was so that he could avoid being connected with previous crimes that had been done in Chicago, scams and things like that. And also there were 2 young boys who had disappeared. One had mysteriously died, and H.H. Holmes, then Herman Mudgett, was suspected in some way of being connected with those things. And so he went to Chicago in August of 1886. Upon arriving to Chicago in Englewood, he worked in a pharmacy, and across the street from that pharmacy that he originally worked at is where he would eventually build a piece of property that would be later dubbed the Murder Castle. The owner of the original pharmacy was a widower. Her name was Mrs. Dr. Holton. She was really happy to have Holmes, and he helped her out quite a bit. He even took on more of managerial tasks, not just the pharmacy type tasks. And as par for the course, he began to defraud her by keeping a lot of the profits from the pharmacy and not giving them to her. So she ended up filing a lawsuit against him. Soon after filing this lawsuit, Mrs. Holton mysteriously disappeared, and H.H. Holmes said that she moved out west, and he even indicated that he had bought the store from her before she left. With the profits and the money that he had from that pharmacy, he purchased the empty lot across the street, and construction began in 1887 for a 2-story building that he deemed would be mixed use. Knowing that the World's Fair was coming to Chicago, he indicated that sort of the first floor would be, pharmacy, shops, and those type of things, and then the subsequent floor would be rooms that he could rent out to people who were traveling to the World's Fair. Once he started building, he actually decided to add a 3rd floor. So the first floor was the shops, the second floor was the boarding rooms, and then he told the investors and the suppliers that he intended to use the 2nd and 3rd floor as a hotel for the upcoming World's Fair, which was known as the Columbian Exhibition. But the hotel 3rd floor part wasn't ever completed. The interesting part was no one knew the exact design of the property other than H.H. Holmes. He fired contractors and workers very frequently. What was later found out about the layout of the hotel or the Murder Castle was that there were 60 known rooms, but only 51 doors. There were stairs that went nowhere, hidden staircases, there was trap doors, there was secret rooms, there were greased chutes in the hotel, a lime pit, there were gas lines run to each of the rooms, there was torches, and there were doors that had rooms that could only be opened from the outside. He also had sort of like a control center type room and primitive alarm system. In 1893, the Chicago World's Fair began. Because of how things were, communication was really slow. Like, people were sending letters, and I think they could send telegrams at that point, but it wasn't like it was today. So when people would travel to the World's Fair, like, they would be gone for weeks at a time, a month, and there was no way to really get back in touch. Like, you could be sending stuff by postal service, but it would take a long time, which honestly was part of the reason why he was able to get away with things for so long. There were many women who had reportedly went to the fair and just never returned home. Not just like his victims, but just in general, that wasn't horribly uncommon. So it was just right for someone who was interested in killing and getting away with it. The World's Fair was held over a 5-year period, and the purpose was to display new scientific and technological inventions. Holmes was a very charismatic person, and again, when you look at the characteristics of a serial killer, that often comes up. He was able to win over people's trust, especially women's trust, very easily. He would often advertise for marriage, which seems to be a common practice, because when I look up other cases around this time frame, this sort of like advertising for a wife or a husband for someone who was a widow was not uncommon. I guess it would be sort of like the modern day like online dating or personal ads, but he would sort of lure these women in by advertising for marriage, advertising for jobs, advertising for rooms for people who were attending the fair. When he brought people in, he was really like weird about saying exactly where they were going. Like, they knew that they were coming to Chicago, but he was really strange about giving specific details in writing. And he always indicated that they bring all of their belongings and all of their money. Rosemary Ross came to work in his pharmacy as his assistant, and he took her out. He lavished her with gifts and attention and dinners, sort of winning her over. During a similar time frame in 1890, Ned and Julia Connor and their daughter Pearl came to work with Holmes. Ned came to run the jewelry store, and Julie was his wife, and Pearl was his child, so they just came with him initially. But Holmes was very drawn to Julia. The one thing that I need to stress is that there was a lot going on. So some of these dates and times, I did the best to research as much as I could, but there was a lot of things happening that were overlapping. And again, some people didn't realize what was going on until after the fact. So piecing together like time frames was a little tricky. So if I indicate something out of order, out of sequence, or contrary to what you know or have researched, just, shoot me a comment down below. After he met Julia, he ended up killing Rosemary, and he made Julia his new assistant in the pharmacy, and soon after that she became his mistress. So even though his building of this lavish murder castle and this hotel and his businesses and the lifestyle that he had, going out on the town frequently, it made him appear wealthy, but he was just drowning in debt. He really didn't have money to be backing up all of these things that he was doing. Ned found out about the affair and he left. He was like, not gonna do this. He was over it. Julia gained custody of their daughter, and she stayed at the hotel with her daughter. She continued her relationship with Holmes. Holmes soon took a insurance policy out on both her and Pearl. Again, this insurance fraud type situation was always an ongoing theme in his crimes. Julia and Pearl disappeared on Christmas Eve of 1893. This date, I've seen several different dates about this particular event. This is one I found quite often. It's always said Christmas Eve, but in terms of the year, there were several different dates, so we're going to say 1893. Holmes later claimed that she had died during an abortion, which was not uncommon, though nobody really found out what actually happened to them. Another person that Holmes became involved with was Emmeline Segrin, and she began working in the building in May of 1892, and she disappeared that December. Yet another woman that vanished was Edna Van Tassel, and she was also believed to be one of Holmes's victims. Holmes met and became close friends with a gentleman named Benjamin Pitzel. He was a carpenter, and he did have a criminal past. Holmes sort of used Pitzel as like his right-hand man for several schemes. The district attorney would later describe Pitzel as Holmes's tool and his creature. In 1893, the one-time actress named Minnie Williams moved to Chicago, and she answered one of Holmes's advertisements, which he did so under an alias. He offered her a job at the hotel as his personal stenographer, and she accepted. Like, I can't imagine what he would have said he needed a stenographer for. Somehow during this relationship, he was able to convince her to transfer her deed to a property that she had in Fort Worth, Texas, to him, and the alias used and the alias on the deed was Alexander Bond, which was one of his known aliases. So she was actually unknowingly signing it over to H.H. Holmes. So the research says that soon after Minnie came, Holmes admitted to killing both Julia and Pearl due to her jealousy. So it's not known if she knew that he did that or if he was just saying when he was confessing that Minnie was jealous. I mean, she had property, he wanted it, and so he got rid of Julia and Pearl just to keep Minnie at bay. It was reported that he did marry her later that same year, the same year that she arrived. He married her, and she was one of the only women that knew of some of his crimes. I don't believe she knew of murders, but she was aware of some of the crimes that were related to sort of these insurance fraud, and maybe potentially like the grave robbing. I mean, that's a crime. Yes, it's disgusting and distasteful and immoral, but it would make him seem like, yeah, maybe he's shady, but he's not hurting anybody that wasn't already deceased. This is where some of the research is really confusing, but some of the research said that in April of 1893, Williams transferred the deed of the Fort Worth, Texas property to Pitzel under the alias Benton T. Lehman. Some of the research said that she had already transferred it to Holmes, so if this was additional properties or for some reason it had to be transferred out of his name, I'm not quite sure what that part is about. The month after the deed was transferred, Holmes and Williams, they went as man and wife and rented an apartment in Chicago's Lincoln Park. Minnie's sister Nanny then came to visit in July. She wrote to her aunt that she planned to accompany brother Harry to Europe. During her stay, she gave over part of her Texas property to Holmes. So if this brother Harry, if that was a cover in some way, obviously, again, he just had a way with women to get them to do what they needed to do. So here, the sister's family is now thinking that she's traveling in Europe. So they are expecting her to be gone for quite some time. It's not positive as to when this happened, but neither Minnie nor Nanny were seen alive after July 5th of 1894. Though, of course, Holmes said that Minnie killed Nanny in like a jealous rage and then moved to Michigan. We know that that's just not true, but that is what he said to explain their absences. Holmes then married Georgina Yoke in January 17th of 1894. It says that Minnie was a witness to this, so this was prior to her leaving. And he was still married to both Marta and Clara in terms of legally, he was still married to both of them.